ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. O Ramakrishna, the establisher of the eternal religion, the embodiment of all religions, and the best of all incarnations, we salute thee. In the last reading class, we were reading about the various sadhanas of the Master and stopped at page number 226. We shall continue today from para 18 of the same page. Haladari lived for about 7 years in the Dakshineshwar temple. Therefore, he saw with his own eyes all these, the sadhu of perfect knowledge behaving like a ghoul, the Brahmani, the holy man of the Ramavati denomination named Jatadhari, and Sri Totapuri coming to Dakshineshwar one after another. We were told by the Master himself that Haladari and Totapuri sat occasionally together and read the Adhyatma Ramayana and other scriptures. The above mentioned events concerning Haladari occurred at different times while he was in Dakshineshwar temple. But we have told the reader already all of them here together for the sake of convenience. It is clear beyond doubt that from the discussion of the Master's life of sadhana so far, that although he was then considered mad by the ordinary people, he was in fact not so. Neither did he suffer from any disease or derangement of the brain. An intense eagerness for the realization of God arose in his heart. He could not then control himself on account of the impulse of that eagerness. People said that he had gone mad, for with an intense eagerness for the realization of God incessantly consuming his heart, he could not mix with people or spend his time laughing and weeping over the ordinary matters. And what can he do when the anguish of the heart transcends the normal power of endurance? Who can control himself, and who can, with mind and speech at variance with each other, keep pace with a world running amok for lust and gold? But the limit to the power of endurance, one might say, is not the same for all. Some become overwhelmed with a little misery or happiness. Others again remain firm and steady like a rock in spite of there being a profound agitation in their hearts arising from either of them. Therefore, how can one know the limit of man's endurance? In reply, let us say that his power of endurance was extraordinary. This will be very clearly understood if we reflect on other events of his life. Need in the extraordinary endurance of the mind and body of a person like him be mentioned. A person who could remain calm in spite of being half fed or unfed and sleepless for 12 long years, who rejected the offers of immense wealth as many times as they came, because they were an obstacle in the path of realization of God. There are innumerable other instances, but we desist from mentioning them here. The careful reader will meet with them at every turn as he goes on with his life. Again, the above mentioned state of the master appeared to be due to a disease in the eyes of those people alone who were extremely attached to worldly objects. No one except Mathur, it is clear, was then present at the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar, who could, with the help of reason and imagination, ascertain partially at least the mental state of the master. We cannot say where Kenaram Bhattacharya vanished immediately after initiating the master, for nothing was heard of him from Hriday or anyone else after that event. That is, after the initiation of the master into the Kali mantra. Therefore, the ignorant, covetous officers of the Kali temple were the only persons left to judge the actions and mental states of the master at that time. What they said cannot be all regarded as proof. It is therefore certain that the words of the holy men who came to Dakshineshwar at that time are the only reliable proofs of it. From what has been heard from the master and others, it is known that those sadhakas and perfected men who, far from being deeming him a victim of insanity, had always a very high opinion of him. When we study the events following this period, we see that he followed immediately any advice given by anyone for the good of his health, till, led by the impulse of the intense eagerness for the realization of God, he completely lost consciousness of his body and of the world outside, and hence lost all care for his own life. He never tried to persist in his own resolve. When people said, "Let him be under treatment," he agreed. When they said that she should be taken to the mother at Kamarpukur, he readily consented. Neither, again, when his marriage was proposed, did he dissent. Considering all this, how can we take his actions and behavior to have been prompted by insanity? Moreover, though he tried indeed to keep himself aloof from worldly people and worldly affairs, on many occasions he not only had no objection to going and mixing with people, but eagerly sought and joined whenever they came together to worship God and sing His glory. This is clearly seen when we find that he used to visit the temple of the 10 Mahavidyas at Baranagar, went sometimes to pay his obeisance to the Universal Mother at Kalighat, and joined the great annual festival at Panihati. In those places also, he sometimes met and had conversations with sadhakas well versed in the scriptures. We have understood from the little we know of these things that those sadhakas held him in great veneration. We may mention, for example, the fact of the master's visit to Panihati during the great festival in AD 1859. There, on that day, he saw Vaishnava Charan, the son of Sri Utsavananda Goswami, for the first time. Some of us have heard from Hriday and also from the master himself that he went to Panihati and sat for some time in the master Manimohan Sen's temple. When Vaishnavacharan came and saw him, and he immediately came to the definite conclusion that the master was in high state of spirituality and that he was one of the rarest of great souls. Vaishnav Charan spent on that day the greater part of his time with the master in the festival ground and purchasing at his own expense mangoes, fried rice, curds, and sweets, offered to the Lord a delicious mixture of them in earthen plates and made merry partaking of the prasada along with the master and the devotees. Again, while returning to Calcutta after the festival, Vaishnav Charan got down at Rani Rasmuni's temple for the purpose of having the privilege of seeing him again, seeing Sri Ramakrishna again, and inquired about him there. When he was told that the master had not returned from the festival yet, he felt disappointed. We have described elsewhere how Vaishnav Charan met the master again 3 or 4 times 4 years later, and how an intimate relationship grew up between them. During this period of 4 years, he often took in his friends a few coins. Sri Ramakrishna's incident is being told. During this period of 4 years, Sri Ramakrishna often took in his hands a few coins and clods of earth and used them to practice discrimination between the real and the unreal, with a view to completely removing from his mind the attachment to gold. He came, with the help of reasoning, to the sure conclusion that the person who had made the realization of Brahman, existence, knowledge, bliss, derived any help, could not derive any help whatsoever from gold any more than from a lump of earth. Therefore, repeating again and again, rupee, earth, earth and rupee, he threw them both into Ganga in order to make the conclusion firmly fixed in his mind. This is an extraordinary thing. Sri Ramakrishna wanted to practice whatever he had realized in meditation or in samadhi. He wanted to bring it into practical life. So when his mind said that the gold has no meaning at all in life, it is as good as a clod of earth, he wanted to practice it. So he took up both of them and threw them equally, with equal abandon and detachment, into the Ganges, so that his mind can clearly see that there was no use of gold for a spiritual person. With a view to having firm conviction that all things and persons, without exception, from Brahma down to a blade of grass, were the manifestations and parts of the Divine Mother, the Master partook of the leavings from the plates of the poor and cleaned the place where they took their food. Because they are all of them are manifestation of God, which Sri Ramakrishna had learned from the scriptures and from the other saints. He said, then everything that is the leftovers from the people who have eaten, even that also is sacred. It is a prasad. As we take the prasad from the temple, it is a leftover from God. So these are all living gods. So this is all prasad. That was his idea. So he practiced it. He went and took from the leavings from the people who had already taken food and took it with that great reverence that he would show to regular prasads from a temple. For the purpose of completely removing pride and egoism from his mind, and of having the conviction that he was not superior to in any way to the object of universal aversion. He cleaned like a sweeper the abominably dirty places with his own hands. Again, in order to completely obliterate from his mind the feeling of aversion and to have the conviction that both the feces and sandal paste were the same in nature, as they were derived from the same five elements. He touched with his tongue others' feces with perfect equanimity. All this and many more extraordinary and unheard of disciplines associated with the name of the Master were performed during this period. When we wonder over these practices and divine visions of the Master during the first 4 years, it becomes clear that a unique, intense eagerness for the realization of God had seized him, and with what an extraordinary faith he plunged himself into sadhana. And simultaneously, this conviction also grows in us that aided by any outside help, unaided by any outside help, and by dint of his sheer eagerness for the realization of God, he succeeded in attaining the perfect vision of the Divine Mother and had the ambition of his life fulfilled. And having thus achieved the results of his spiritual disciplines, he proceeded to compare them with the teachings of the Guru and Shastras. The Master said that when the aspirant becomes purified and sanctified by completely controlling his mind and senses by means of restraint and renunciation, his own mind occupies the position of the Guru. The waves of ideas that arise then in his mind show him the right path and bring on him quickly to the goal of life. During the period, the pure and holy mind of the Master became his Guru and taught him that what was and what was not to be done. It did not, however, rest satisfied there, but on many occasions, assuming a form, as it were, of a different person, it came out from his body, appeared before him, and encouraged him to go forward with his sadhana. So his own mind assumed the form and came out of his body and guided him like a person in a guru. So this was his experience. Sometimes it threatened that person who comes out from himself. Sometimes that person threatened him with punishment if he did not dive deep in a particular discipline, explaining why it should be performed and and what its result should be. This is why the Master saw at the time of meditation a sannyasin with a sharp trident in his hand came out of his body and say, "If you do not fully give up all other thoughts and meditate wholeheartedly on your chosen ideal, I will pierce your heart with this trident." This is why when the Papa Purusha, the embodiment of the desires for enjoyment, emerged from his body, thus this young sannyasin, whom the Master saw also, came out immediately from his body and killed that villain of Papa Purusha, the sinful man. Desirous to see the images of deities or listen to the singing of God's glory in distant places, this young sannyasin came out of the Master's body in an effulgent form similar to his and arrived at those places along a luminous path and returned along the same path and entered his gross body. We have been told by the Master himself of many such visions. That means his self would come out. He would be there physically in one place, but his self would go to different places wherever the performances of devotional songs were going on. He would listen in his subtle or divine body, and after finishing of that incident, it would come back and enter into his body. It was so common with him. Just as we think, he would himself move in his spiritual form to different places. That's what we notice here. The master began to have the vision of this young sannyasin with his body, within his body, almost from the commencement of his sadhana. For several years it happened like this. He became gradually accustomed to guide himself according to his advice regarding the performance or non-performance of all actions. In the course of a conversation on the extraordinary visions and experiences of his life during his sadhana, one day the master said to us, "The figure of a young sannyasin, looking like me, used to come out again and again from within me and instruct me on all matters. When he emerged, sometimes I had a little consciousness and at other times lost it altogether and lay inert, only seeing and hearing his actions and words. When afterwards he entered this gross body, I regained full consciousness." The Brahmani, Totapuri, and others came and taught me afterwards what I had heard from him previously. From him means that sannyasin from inside. That means his own higher self. So he had already taught so many things, which the other gurus came later on, more to confirm than teach him. So that was what happened. They taught me what I had already known. It seems from this that they came as gurus in my life in order that the authority of the scriptures, such as the Vedas, might be maintained by my honoring their injunctions. So in the Vedas, the main scripture of the Hindus, the realization of great sages are recorded. All of them have said again and again, one should not rest very comfortable with one's spiritual realizations unless they are confirmed by gurus who have realized also. That means your realization must tally with the realization of others also. So that was done when these other gurus came from outside and confirmed all his spiritual realizations. This was the age-old tradition which again upheld. It is true today also. That's what he proved. No other reason can be found for accepting the naked one, that is Totapuri, and others as gurus. The other gurus otherwise was not necessary because he had known already what they taught. But why did they come? To prove that the scriptures, what is recorded, is true. If once these scriptures are proved true, scriptures are there for thousands of years. Incarnations come and go, but scriptures keep their words, keep their teachings for eternity to come. So, if scriptures are proved now and then by the realized persons that what is there is correct, it has been verified very recently, then the scriptures become real authority, a dependable authority for common people to follow also. So that was the purpose that was served by these people who came from outside and confirmed his realizations. When the master went to Kamarpukur during the latter part of the period of his sadhana, Another extraordinary vision occurred. This vision took place while he was going in a palanquin from Kamarpukur to Hriday's house in the village of Shihar. Witnessing under the deep blue sky a vast expanse of open fields covered with paddy, green and dark blue in hue, with rows of trees such as the fig, the banyan, etc., affording cool shade along the path, he was proceeding with a heart full of joy. When two beautiful boyish figures of tender age suddenly came out his body. Earlier, that sannyasin had come out, like that, these two divine looking boys came out of his body. Now, advancing with a slow step, now running playfully hither and there, sometimes going far in the fields in search of wild flowers, etc., and at other times walking beside the palanquin. They laughed and joked and conversed and made merry as boys do. They thus proceeded happily for a long time. And then they came back and he entered his body. Both these divine figures, that boyish looking figures, he entered his body and disappeared. The learned Brahmani came to the Kali temple at Dakshineshwar for the first time about a year and a half after this vision. She heard of this vision from the master and said, without being at all surprised, my child, what you have seen is all true. Chaitanya is manifest this time in Nityananda's sheath, Nityananda's body. Nityananda and Chaitanya have come together this time and are both residing in you, in one and the same receptacle. So Chaitanya in Nityananda's body, both of them together in the body of Sri Ramakrishna. Putting it clear, briefly, that inside Sri Ramakrishna, the two great spiritual persons, Incarnation Chaitanya and his own spiritual brother Nityananda. They are supposed to be something like twins singing the name of the Lord. Both of them were there inside Sri Ramakrishna himself. That's what Bhairavi Brahmani says. Saying so Nitya Chaitanya have come together this time and are both residing in you in one and the same receptacle. Hriday said, saying so, the Brahmani recited the following lines from the Chaitanya Bhagavata, which is an authority on all that happened in Chaitanya's life. Throwing his arms around Advaita's neck, Sri Chaitanya says again and again, I will manifest my wonderful play once more. My form will be that of bliss during the singing of the glory of God. The Brahmani quoted again, Gora acts his play even today. It is persons of the rarest good fortune that are privileged to witness it. When we were visiting him one day, the master said to us in connection with the topic of this vision, it is true that I had that vision, and it is also true that the Brahmani said so when she heard of it. But how can I say what real meaning of it is from these words of the master regarding that vision of his? We think that at this time the master got some clear indication that identified with his body and mind some ancient soul known to the world for very long ages was dwelling here with a view to accomplishing some important purpose. So Sri Ramakrishna, when he did not explain what is the meaning of those two divine persons getting in, when he kept quiet, then the author, Swami Sharadananda, says it means that the Avatara Chaitanya and Nityananda, they have again come into Sri Ramakrishna to accomplish a divine purpose in this modern age. We see Sri Ramakrishna taking the essence of teachings of Gauranga, teaching in his bhakti to all the common people, Naradiya bhakti. Many of the songs that he sings, many of the incidents he tells are from Chaitanya and Nityananda's life and then actions. So it seems that the extraordinary indication he had about his individuality, with the help of these visions and experiences, clearly convinced him in course of time that the one who manifested himself in Ayodhya and Vrindavan as Sri Ramachandra, dear to Janaki, and Sri Krishna Chandra, the beloved of Radha, respectively, for the purpose of establishing religion in past ages, has incarnated himself once more as Sri Ramakrishna in a human body in order to impart a new ideal of religion to India and to the world. For when we were with him, we heard him say again and again, whether he was in the full enjoyment of health or suffering acutely from a disease, when he was well or ill, he used to say, the one who became Rama and Krishna is now within us, within this case, showing his own body. But his advent this time is secret. Secret means Sri Ramakrishna's appearance was so simple. People could not even associate him with a great scholar, not to speak of associating him with the incarnation of God, the best of all the incarnations, as Sri Swami Vivekananda called him, Avatara Varishta. So that is us coming in secret, hiding all the glories of godliness in him. He came as a very, very ordinary person in this age. That is why it is very difficult to recognize him. But it is a truth. That's what the author says. If we want to test the truth of the vision mentioned above, no other means can be found than believing in the words of the Master himself, spoken at other times to his devotees of the inner circle. Sri Ramakrishna had an inner circle of devotees. That means were very intimate with him, who put into practice all that he preached. Most of them were very young, like Narendranath, Rakhal, and others. So they were called as inner circle. So they also spoke about Sri Ramakrishna. That is an authority which we can take. Leave out his vision, we can have the sure conviction of the truth of all other visions of his. For the visions of his nature occurred daily in the Master's life when we were visiting him. And his skeptical English educated disciples were defeated as they tried to test the truth of these visions and experiences. And these young people who were with him, like Narendranath, later on Swami Vivekananda, they did not accept Sri Ramakrishna's teaching just like that. They were all graduates or candidates for graduates in the University of Calcutta, one of the great universities of the British Empire. So they wanted to test whatever Sri Ramakrishna told, but all had to, in the end, accept what Sri Ramakrishna had said. So that's what the author is mentioning. As they tried to test the truth of these visions and experiences, they were all defeated. That means they had to accept what Sri Ramakrishna has said were all 100% true. We shall record here one more for the satisfaction of the reader. It was the end of 1885 when the people of Calcutta, men, women, and children, were all filled with joy and enthusiasm as usual on the occasion of the great autumn worship and festival. Autumn festival of Durga, the Durga Puja. Although the current of that bliss was being particularly felt in the hearts of the Master's devotees, there was a great obstacle standing in the way of its manifestation. For he in whose company they felt the surge of delight was seriously ill. The Master was suffering from cancer of the throat. So, though the festival was there all around, festivity was around, the devotees could not be enjoying those festivities because their gurus, Sri Ramakrishna, was suffering from cancer in the throat. The devotees had hired a two-storied house at Shampukur in Calcutta and had brought the master there about a month previously from Dakshineshwar. Dakshineshwar is almost about 9-10 miles to the north of Calcutta. So doctors could not go all the way. In those times, only the horse cart was only the conveyance. So it would take hours together to go and come for doctors. It was difficult to treat him. Therefore, he was brought to Calcutta itself, where doctors were available in number. Mahendralal Sarkar, the well-known doctor, prescribed medicine and diet and was doing his best to cure the master. But the disease had shown no sign of abatement so far. On the contrary, it was worsening by degrees. The householder devotees would come to that house morning and evening and supervise and make all necessary arrangements. Many of the young student devotees were engaged in the service of the Master at all times, except when they went to have their meals to their homes. Some again would, whenever necessary, spend all the 24 hours in that house of Shampukur without going home even for their meals. If the master spoke much or went into ecstasy again and again, the blood in his body would flow upward and constantly irritate the sore in his throat, which prevented the cure. That's what the doctors thought. Therefore, the doctor advised the master to check both the acts, that is, going into ecstasy and speaking. Both he could not avoid. Neither could he avoid speaking about spiritual things when devotees come, nor could he stop his own ecstasy. So both were impossible for him. But the doctor wanted this work to be taken up by him, and he has to do like that. The master too was trying to follow the prescription, but in spite of himself, reverting to them again and again. That means his speaking he could not stop, and his ecstasies also he could not stop. For unlike ordinary men, he failed to regard precious his own body, which he looked upon with contempt all his life, as a trifling cage of flesh and bone, from which he had withdrawn his mind completely. As soon as a topic of God was raised, he would forget all about his body and everything about maintaining it, and joining the discussion of the topic almost with the same enthusiasm as before, would repeatedly go into ecstasy. There were many souls which came thirsting for spirituality, unable to remain indifferent to the eagerness of their hearts. The Master taught them sadhana, though in a low voice. He was weak, but he could not stop talking because his compassion was so great. Seeing his joy and enthusiasm in the work of ministration to which he applied himself untiringly, many of the devotees thought that the master's disease was quite simple and could be easily cured and became free from anxiety. Some again opined a strange comprehension of spiritual matters that the master had purposely assumed this physical disease for bestowing his grace on the new devotees and imparting religion to so many. So some people interpreted, he is God himself, was incarnated. How can disease come to him? He has himself imposed the disease upon himself so that many people will come to meet and then he can give his spiritual teachings to them. So this is a strange interpretation. The doctor was visiting almost every day in the morning or in the afternoon. While he was examining the patient, writing the prescription, and advising the attendants, he would be so absorbed in listening to the master's conversation on God. He could not take his leave even after the lapse of 2 or 3 hours. Doctors usually come and spend about half an hour or much less to know what has happened and what should happen, prescribe their medicine and go. But here was one of the most famous doctors of Calcutta, spending three hours to write prescription for and know about his medical condition. Again, putting question after question and listening for a long time to the wonderful solutions of these, he would sometimes say, the doctor would sometimes say regretfully, I made you talk much. It has been unwise. But don't talk with anybody else for the rest of the day. And then it won't do you any harm. As an excuse, he is telling him, don't you see, your words have such an attraction that whenever I come to you, I can't leave this place for 2 or 3 hours and I have to neglect my profession. I don't even know how time flies. Anyway, don't talk so long with anyone else. Partly as a joke and partly with love and joy, he said, talk thus with me only and when I come only. That will not do any harm to you. At this, the doctor and all others would laugh. You see, this doctor is not an ordinary doctor. He was a famous allopathic doctor. Somehow he was charmed by the homeopathy. So he was keeping up his allopathic practice also, but became a great proponent of homeopathy. So he wanted to prove the efficacy, greater efficacy of homeopathy. Therefore, he was in search of great people so that by treating them, homeopathy also get a fillip, encouragement from others. So that is how this doctor used to come. He was a erudite person, highly rational. He had started a scientific association which produced some great scientists in India. So such a rational, scientific man in the practical medical profession, he would lose himself by hearing Sri Ramakrishna's words on practical spirituality. Such was the wonderful attraction and the charm of the Master's words. We shall hear much more about Sri Ramakrishna's the sadhanas and his dealings with different great persons of his time. So today we shall stop our reading here itself. We will take it up in the next class. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanukampadhrita Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamaha. O Ramakrishna, the taintless one, the Eternal One, the One with infinite forms, the One who has assumed a form out of compassion to the devotees, the incarnate Supreme Soul, and the adorable Lord of all, we salute, bowing our heads before Thee.